consistency is important to success. In fact, I believe consistency is the foundation of success. Doing repetitive things over and over again that move the needle, that keep pushing you forward towards growth and becoming better, a new and improved version of yourself, the tomorrow you. Consistency allows you to become the person you need to become in order for success to visit you. And the thing that makes habits so important and so powerful is that habits automate that consistency, that repetition. Meaning you don't have to force yourself to do the things that you need to do once they become habits. You're going to do them when you're sick. You're going to do them on vacation. You're going to engage in your habits no matter what, because habits are unconscious programming that once formed, and I'll explain how it happens, that once formed, habits never go away. They never go away. When you have good habits, you have a good life. When you have bad habits, you have a bad life. And there's a couple of things that are habits. The definition of habits is really behavior, repetitive thinking, repetitive emotions, and repetitive decision making. Believe it or not, how you make a decision is a habit. You go through the same processes before you make a decision. So there's a lot that you're doing that is habitual, and there's a 2006 study by Duke. It's kind of a famous study, and they found that 40% of all of our behaviors, thinking, emotions, and decisions are habits. So 40% of the time you're on autopilot every day. There was another study that was done subsequent, almost concurrently, but a little bit later than that study, and it was the David Neal and Wendy Wood study, and they found 45% of all of those things were habits. So there's two studies that are indicating that somewhere between 40 and 45% of the time, everything you do, think, your emotions, and the decisions you make are habits. Now, habits have a purpose. There's really two purposes to habits. If you think about it, why do we have habits? Why? Why do habits exist? Well, the brain is an energy hog. It sucks up 25% of the glucose, which is the primary fuel. Has anybody ever done intermittent fasting? Okay, so you know about ketones, right? So glucose, ketones. Glucose is primarily how everybody gets their energy. Ketones are very interesting. They're inside the fat cells. They are the brown fat. And what happens is when you run out of glucose, the body turns to the liver and starts processing glycogen into glucose, and then that flows into the cells, all the cells throughout the body. But when when the liver runs out of glycogen, it turns to fat cells, and it says we've got to melt the fat cells. So your body actually melts the fat cells, and then it takes the ketones out of the byproduct, and it introduces them into the blood, and then the ketones make their way into all the cells in our body. The interesting thing about ketones is, remember yesterday I talked about how the glucose enters the membrane of the cell wall, and then once it's in there, the mitochondria takes the glucose, and the oxygen catalyzes the glucose, sort of like on the Serengeti, where you see the tigers ripping apart a carcass. Well, that's what's going on inside the mitochondria, inside every cell. What's interesting about ketones is that ketones produce 20% more ATP, which is the ultimate fuel source. Glucose is converted to ATP, ketones are converted to ATP. So when you are doing intermittent fasting, you're actually experiencing an energy boost because your cells now have 20% more energy than you had with the ordinary glucose. The other reason why the purpose of habits is efficiency. The brain forms habits because it seeks efficiency. It seeks fuel conservation and it seeks efficiency. It wants to do things without the use of the prefrontal cortex. How many people have moved in the last two years? Okay, now, right, so you know what I'm talking about here. When you move, everything changes, right? Where do the forks go? Where, you're looking for where, your clothes are. What part of the closet? That's the prefrontal cortex. And that first couple of months in a move is exhausting because your prefrontal cortex, which is the most, it uses the most energy of any part of the brain. Your prefrontal cortex is working overtime. And so the brain says, enough of this crap, we got to start forming habits. Otherwise we're going to die. I just can't keep going at this pace. The prefrontal cortex makes a command to the basal ganglia, and you start forming habits within a couple of months. This creation process I want to just touch on. So this basal ganglia is a golf ball-sized mass of brain cells in the middle of the limbic system, in the middle of the head. What it has that's unique to the brain is something called spindle neurons. They're spindle dendrites. And these neurons reach up, their spindle dendrites, up into, they can go into any part of the brain. When you have a behavior, thinking, emotion, or decision-making that is repetitive, the more repetitive it is, the more the basal ganglia takes notice. And the prefrontal cortex is communicating with the basal ganglia. And it says, hey, there's something going on here. This mass of neurons that's communicating, this synapse, keeps talking to each other. So the basal ganglia goes, hey, let me check it out. So it sends up a spindle dendrite right into the area of the neurons, the synapse, and it monitors it for a couple of weeks. And then the basal ganglia makes a decision and says, hey, this is not going to stop. And this synapse keeps growing stronger. So then it kind of attaches itself to the group or the synapse. And the minute the basal ganglia dendrite attaches to that mass of neurons, it creates infrastructure like a highway. And it never goes away. It marks it as a habit. It's a habit forever. So that the brain invests a lot of energy in the creation of a habit. If you can think about it, the prefrontal cortex is making the basal ganglia aware. Basal ganglia now has to grow a dendrite. That requires energy. It's a lot of energy to grow dendrites and to expand the branches of your axons. So it's investing a lot of energy into creating the habit. And this is